It's not uncommon to see disturbing stories about monsters or ghosts on the internet, but some people forget that there is something equally scary, aliens. And in this video, understand why you should be very afraid of them. But first, if you're new here, remember to subscribe to the channel. The channel's goal is to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can achieve it. So please sign up. Now let's on to the first story. I have a strange job. These are some of my clients. Luke is terrible at football, I have to admit. I know as a parent this is a terrible thing to say, but my 8-year-old is so much better at math than running around dribbling the ball on a soccer field. Yet he has the time of his life every time he steps onto the field. His enthusiasm often rubbing off on his teammates and sometimes even his coach, whether it's a midweek training session or a late season game. Weak. Luke gives his all, even if the end result is not to his liking. Today would be a good example of this, as his team, the Trailblazers, were defeated 0-7. So it became customary to find a tree to sulk about. Luke always looks forward to ice cream at his favorite joint after every Sunday game, where he goes over the specifics of the game in the hopes that a change in tactics will lead to a change in outcome in the next game. His attention, however, changed midway when he saw a large limousine pull up to a nearby construction site. "Do you drive one of those?" he asked, looking at me. I wasn't surprised by the question since I work as a driver for a car rental agency, but we no longer had those limousines in our store. Its popularity had waned over the years, and many companies now preferred more business travel. Now find them tacky, at least in New York financial circles. No one but your grandfather, in fact. He used to pick me up from school in that car often, and we used to ride a lot. "Units, I'd like to travel in that one too someday," Luke replied with his eyes still fixed on the car. "Well, maybe you can get your date to prom in that thing in a few years," I said, smiling, while Luke wrinkled his nose in mock disgust. The limo side brought mixed feelings to me. My daddy, Henry Pritchard, walked out of my life when I was 10, and I never saw him again. One fine day, he told me that he was traveling abroad for a short time and emphasized that I would be the man of the house until he returned. He also instructed me that I should take it well and take care of Mom until he returns. As I peered out my bedroom window, I saw Dad wave to me one last time before boarding a red limo outside our house. I never saw or heard from him again. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted when I felt my phone ring in my pocket. It was from my boss, Gary. "Hey Matt, we have a new reservation today. Big Fish, from the looks of it, has booked us for the entire month. He insisted that you be wheelman. He said you came very well recommended. I think he can handle it all the way through." "Of course, boss. Just say when and where." "Great. Take good care of him, Matt. He can give you a golden tip. Oh, and take Roy for a walk," he added before ending the call. Roy, the custom-ordered Rolls-Royce Phantom, is our best car in the rental shop. It is reserved exclusively for our main customers. Gary and I visited the manufacturers and spent a few days meticulously selecting every detail for Roy, from the Arctic white leather seats to discreet bullet protection, wood veneers for upholstery, and all the other amenities to achieve the best mix of luxury and safety. Gary and my dad were very good friends, and they both worked for the same rental company. Gary is also my godfather, and when my father disappeared, he made an extra effort to fill the void in my life. I developed a rebellious streak in my early teens, angry that Dad had abandoned Mom and me as a family. For the first few months after he disappeared, I made it a point to peer out the window every day, sometimes for hours, waiting for him to return. Eventually, I developed a habit that never stopped and still continues subconsciously to this day, even though I know better now. However, at that time, the anger eventually grew, and Mommy had a difficult time controlling me. My grades started to drop. I picked fights with children at school and even tried my luck being an errand boy for the from my neighborhood. Gary had to step in and introduce me to his love of basketball and driving. He hired me for long trips once a month for a whole year and showed me the countryside, which felt like a soothing balm for the wounded soul. But my happiest moment came when I was present at the stadium with Gary and Tino. Martinez's 98 Grand Slam unfolded right in front of our eyes. We were all delirious with joy in the stadium as I found myself hugging and celebrating with random strangers. This experience changed my life, and I emerged transformed as a person. Gary also obtained a sign, shirt, and cap from the players during his time chauffeuring them on tour, presenting them to me as a birthday present. This remains my most prized possession. When he started his own video store, I joined him straight out of school and had been working for him ever since. My childhood experiences motivated me to be the best father I could be to my son since his mother was no longer with us. I would always go the extra mile to ensure he had a supportive and loving environment. I tried to instill in Luke my love of driving and baseball, but the boy gravitated toward football. Fortunately, we still share one thing in common: our love for cars. He always looks forward to the long weekend trips. My mind was diverted again when I heard my phone beeping. Gary had just sent me details about the next client. I left Luke at home and went to the workshop garage to take Roy for a spin. A few hours later, I arrived at the address given to me, located a little on the outskirts of the city. I got there half an hour ahead of schedule. I parked my car near a diner and noticed a large man standing at the entrance, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Wearing a pinstripe suit, he appeared to be in his early 50s, about 6 feet 5 inches tall, with broad shoulders and a heavy build. His salt and pepper hair was combed back and his beard was neatly trimmed. He casually smoked a cigar while holding a cane in his other hand, adorned with a prominent goat-shaped carving on the top. "Mr. Thomas Devlin?" I asked as I got out of the car. He nodded, extending his hand as he pressed the cigar to his mouth. "And you must be Bravo," he declared in a booming baritone voice. I could see some gold teeth shining in the dark as he flashed a warm smile. "Yes, sir, I'm Matt Pritchard," I replied. "Your driver for the night. I hope I didn't keep you waiting," I asked, feeling a hint of embarrassment despite being early. "No, young man. I usually like to stretch my legs and enjoy a cigar after a good meal," he said, pointing to the restaurant behind him. Mr. Devlin seemed like a peculiar sight in this neighborhood, especially with the restaurant in the backdrop. Everything about it screamed money, so it made me wonder why someone of his wealth would choose to visit this place at this time. But I could also sense an undeniable toughness in him, the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to get down and dirty if the need arose. A few minutes later, Mr. Devlin suggested we get on the road, and I promptly opened the car door, allowing him to get into the back seat. As I took my position behind the wheel, he handed me a gold card the size of a regular government ID, but much thicker. It had a red trident symbol engraved on both ends. As I looked at it, confused, he told me to just put it on the GPS screen. I did as I was told, and the navigation system immediately came to life, displaying a new set of coordinates. Mr. Devlin noticed my lingering confusion as I continued to look at the card that was stuck on the screen. "Probably a hidden chip embedded in that thing," he joked from the back seat, his teeth flashing as I glanced in the rearview mirror. I quickly nodded in acknowledgement and began driving. As we navigated the city, Mr. Devlin shared that he lived in Chicago and was currently in town for a new business venture. It wasn't much of a conversation, but instead showed more interest in my life, asking about my work and family. This seemed a bit unusual for a businessman of his nature to delve into a driver's experiences. He particularly enjoyed the humorous stories I told, turning Luke around many times, flashing a smile. While drivers typically hand-told anecdotes to bored customers, Mr. Devlin appeared genuinely intrigued by my life, almost as if he was using this as an opportunity to size me up. The navigation system then finally beeped to signal our arrival at the location of a newly opened Grand Hotel, which appeared just a few meters away. "Sir, your card," I said, as I retrieved the golden card from the screen and turned in my seat to hand it to him. "Keep it, Matt," he replied. "It's your tip for the night, don't worry, it's genuine." He laughed when he noticed me looking at the gold card a little longer than necessary and considered it a ticket, not a letter. Mr. Devlin was silent for a moment, remaining seated in contemplation as he looked in my direction before speaking again. "I have a proposal for you. Would you be interested in listening to me?" he suddenly asked. "Of course, Mr. Devlin. What do you have in mind?" "I'm looking for a driver I can trust. Your name was recommended by a former client of yours whose judgment I trust. They said you are good at your job, always on time, know your way around town, and are discreet about the customers you transport. Would you accept this as an accurate assessment of yourself?" "Yes, sir, that would be correct." "Well then, here's what I have in mind. I need you to transport my clients for the next 30 days. Pickup details will be texted to your phone every day at 7 p.m. All you need to do is pick them up and drop them off at the concierge provided for you. This is nothing more than what happened between us today. A golden ticket will be given to you at the start of each collection, and this would be your payment for the services provided. I hope I've been clear so far." He stopped halfway to ask me if I understood. I simply waved back. "Excellent. Now I have 3 conditions that you need to religiously follow. First, if you agree to take on this work, you cannot abandon it midway. I need you to see this through to the end. Second, under no circumstances should you participate or be involved in any activity that passengers may be involved in. Your job is just to transport them, and once you leave them at the designated place, you have to go back. No need to wait to get them again. Third, you must be discreet about this work, which means no one else can know about it, including your boss or any other colleague at your agency. Those are the only 3 rules you need to follow. Furthermore, payment for your company has already been agreed in full during the term of the proposed agreement, covering fuel costs and exclusively reserving your services as a driver, so you don't have to worry about other commitments. I need you to just focus on the job at hand. Are we clear? He asked, pausing again to wait for my answer. I nodded in understanding, although I was starting to become wary of what was being offered. The more the man talked, the more I began to wonder if I was getting into some kind of trouble. Sir, I have to ask, does this job involve any dealings with gray areas of the law? I asked gently. Mr. Dellon paused for a moment before speaking. Maybe not, but I can guarantee that you won't achieve this. In any type of legal problem, I trust that you, as a driver long enough, will know when to look the other way. Treat this job like any other and you will be very successful. I felt a sense of unease about the whole thing and began to slowly shake my head when Mr. Dellon said, "Look, Matt, there's no need to rush the decision. If your answer is no, just keep it to yourself for now. You can just message me with a decision tomorrow. My suggestion to you is to take the night to sort things out. It's good, easy money that you can earn in a month. You could probably use it to buy something nice for your child. However, there is no pressure from me. Your employer will not receive negative feedback from me if you choose to reject the offer. So I'll go. It's entirely up to you." I waved back at him, smiling. I'm grateful he's open and direct with me. "All right, then I guess it's time to get up," he said as he prepared to leave. I quickly got out of the vehicle to open the door for him. Mr. Dellon shook my hand and began his walk to the hotel. I saw him slowly climb the stairs and enter the doors of the newly built Trident Regency Hotel. The next day, just as I was told, I received a message on my phone at 7 p.m. sharp. It gave the pickup location and also reminded me to arrive on time. I sat up and looked at the golden note that was lying on my nightstand. Picking it up, I examined it closely, feeling its weight in my hand as I palmed it. It would certainly be worth a considerable chunk of money, especially if I were to take possession of another 30. They, plus the elegantly embossed ruby and trident inlaid on both sides of the card, would only add value. On the one hand, I had a bad feeling about this. Knowing the client from last night very well, I could have been involved in a questionable line of work, but I also saw this as an opportunity to make some quick money. It's only a month-long gig, requiring a few hours of driving each day. I could easily be earning 2 or 3 times my annual salary within that time frame, perhaps even more once I know exactly how much these cards are worth. I mean, how bad could it really get? I asked myself when I really thought about it. I may be forced to drive people to an illegal gambling den or take a VIP client to your favorite in the middle of the night. No one is going to hire a premium car service to turn me over to petty crime, I reasoned. My eyes then turned to my son Luke, who was immersed in his studies. He was busy solving a new math problem, and it made me smile. He was probably the only one child in the world who liked the idea of homework. Give him a few books that pique his interest, and he will need to be constantly reminded to eat. Maybe I could sell the tickets and deposit the money in a bank, leaving it untouched for a few years, slowly accumulating interest. When Luke gets older, the money could be useful for paying for college. The more I contemplated, the more I wanted to take on this work, so I responded back saying I would be there. I got ready and dressed, heading out the door 20 minutes early. Before leaving, I contacted my regular client, Nanny Jennifer, who lives with her family on the same floor in the apartment next to ours. She really likes Luke and agrees to keep an eye on him whenever I'm out for work. I got into my car and instructed little Roy to be on his best behavior for the night. Starting the car, I headed out of my apartment building toward my pickup location. Upon arriving at the location, my attention was immediately drawn to a man dressed as a clown, carrying a backpack slung over his shoulder. When our eyes met, I realized he was my fare for the night, the passenger I was supposed to pick up. The clown opened the door and sat in the back seat. He reached into his jacket and handed me his ticket. I could see that his fingers were bruised, giving me the impression that he had been involved in some kind of fight recently. Great start, Matt, I thought to myself. I received his ticket and put it on the GPS screen, which immediately began relaying a new set of coordinates. What's strange about this new deal is that it doesn't reveal the destination up front. Instead, all you get are directions to the next 150 feet ahead of you. The blue line on the screen only updates as much as your car's movement. As I drove, I thought the whole thing was a little bizarre, but the ticket was working its magic, dangling like a carrot in front of me. Every time I tried to fight with reason, I quickly glanced in the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of my passenger. He looked tired and exhausted and was resting his head on the headrest. Despite the heavy makeup on his face, it was visible that he had wounds, even by clown standards. I thought his outfit was unusual and strange. From the rainbow-colored wig he wore, a wavy white one that reminded him of those lawyers in British courts. There was also a neckband protruding from his clothing, which people often associate with lawyers. What was this guy doing to me, I thought to myself, as the clown simply rested in the back seat of the car, whistling softly and rhythmically tapping his fingers on his backpack as if he were preparing to put on a show. A few minutes later, the system beeped abruptly to signal arrival at a certain pink pharmacy, located on the opposite side of the road. The clown thanked me for the ride and got out of the car. He stretched for a moment and then opened his backpack to remove a horn. He reached into his pocket for a pair of brass knuckles with his right hand and placed it in his fist. Oncoming traffic suddenly stopped to make way for the clown. He crossed the road, blowing his horn and swinging his raised arm in the air. Passengers cursed him as he passed, but he remained unfazed and continued moving forward. The clown then rolled his hand into a fist and pointed at the guy working behind the counter at the pharmacy. The employee just looked back from the store window. His face turned white and he immediately bent down, probably to pick up a... But the clown was prepared and suddenly ran away in a sprint. He threw away his horn and ran into the pharmacy, taking customers by surprise. The employee, by this time, had recovered a... but just barely, as the clown grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and slammed his head against the counter. He then dragged the hapless employee to his side of the store and wrestled the from his reach. The clown pointed the in the air and immediately, suggesting to customers that they should flee. He then pointed directly to the employee while waiting for people to run. I could see him saying something excited to the employee, but he was too far away to understand anything. After the people left, he emptied the and threw it behind the counter. The clown then grabbed the employee and began repeatedly punching him in the face. I watched in shock and amazement as he grabbed the guy's shirt and started pushing him hard. Both hit the store window, breaking it and falling to the sidewalk. The clown quickly got up and started punching the employee again, who was lying spread out on the sidewalk. Every time he raised his fist in the air, he looked up at the sky as if he was asking the gods above, "Are you happy? Is this enough?" before delivering another blow. He kept repeating this over and over again. Cars on the road passed by, momentarily blocking my view of the event, resembling a flickering tube light illuminating a dark space in momentary bursts. When the clown's fist made contact, it was like a bolt of lightning striking its intended target. I watched it all completely transfixed, unable to move my mind or muscles. I jolted back to my senses only when a large vehicle suddenly parked in front of the pharmacy, completely blocking my view. Until then, it felt like I was in a trance. I immediately started my car and accelerated. As I drove, my mind struggled to remember whether the vehicle at the scene was a patrol car, an ambulance, or simply another taxi. The surreal nature of the encounter left me uneasily questioning the unpredictable clown's motives and actions. Despite driving in circles for the next 20 minutes, I eventually found myself back at the exact spot where the incident happened the night before. I stopped the car, but kept the engine running as I continued to look at the hotel located just 15 meters away from me. Maybe I should go up those stairs and tell Mr. Dellin that I'm no longer interested in this job, or I could just ask my boss Gary to cancel the order. He would definitely understand if I told him the show was risky and wouldn't happen. Something told me to pack my bags and disappear for a while. On any other day I would have done that, but I felt something awaken in me when I saw that clown in the pharmacy. I couldn't understand what it was. I hadn't felt this alive in years and I struggled to shake it off. At the same time, I could feel an overwhelming cacophony of contradictory voices in my head simultaneously coming to life, each fighting against the other to gain the upper hand in dictating my future course of action. So what are we waiting for, Matt? You saw the clown in action, how he made the world his own circus. How much more notice do you need? But you have a deal to honor here, Matt, and you have a duty to see it through to the end. It didn't hurt anyone. You didn't do anything wrong here. A clown would have gone through this. Plan anyway, even if you didn't take on this job. So this is how we're going to rationalize tonight's events? Would you consider taking a job knowing you would be directing smugglers dealing in stolen body parts or offering your services to a group that children? When do they come home from school? These are extreme examples, Matt, and they are being presented to mess with your head. Don't overthink this. The world is not a fair place. We all know that sometimes we have to do our best and take advantage of opportunities that arise. Remember that you have a child who needs care. You've seen how smart Luke is, how he could be a doctor or an engineer someday. How else are you going to get the money for college, the tuition you swore to yourself that day you held Luke in your arms for the first time? You promised you would be present in his life and not abandon him like your father did to you. Wow, that's low for even you, Matt. To drag your father and son into a mess of your own making. Have you ever stopped to consider that you could end up in prison because of this? If the first day was traumatic, what do you think will happen in the next few days? Are you planning to become Father of the Year behind bars while your child grows up in foster care? Do you think the little intellectual can survive the of children twice his size? Why don't you admit, Matt, that you liked what you saw back there and that somewhere deep inside you there's a flaw in your moral character? I turned off the car and closed my eyes, resting my forehead on the steering wheel, trying desperately to filter out all the noise. I took long, deep breaths as I tried to steady my mind. A little later, I leaned back in my seat and tried to think things over again from scratch. One night, just one more night, I said to myself, and if things don't change for the better, we will give up no matter what. I finally decided, a few minutes later. I started the car again and drove home to prepare for the next day. When the clock struck 7 the next day, I was already sitting in my car and started driving to the location. As I approached the collection point, I spotted a tall, lone figure near a bus stop in the distance. As I got closer, I discovered that my passenger for the night was none other than Batman. When I stopped my car and looked out the window, I saw the man's cape flowing gracefully in the wind, casting a dramatic silhouette against the backdrop of the city skyline. Batman then opened the door and got into the back seat of my car. "Gotham City?" I asked, looking in the rearview mirror and offering a half smile. I knew my attempt at humor wouldn't work on him, but I needed to size up the new client somehow, trying to avoid a repeat of last night. "Someone's getting too comfortable," Batman growled back with a scowl as he handed me the golden ticket he held in his hand. He then leaned back and looked at the road ahead silently. I put the card in the navigation system and started driving, deciding to keep quiet for the rest of the trip. As the minutes passed, the man disguised as Batman slowly began to exude a certain kind of heat, almost reluctant to admit that he was having too much fun. A smile even appeared on his face as he relaxed to the rhythm of New York's evening traffic, silently observing people going about their daily lives, friends laughing at each other's jokes, people enjoying a quiet meal at a bistro, commentators engaging in heated disputes, and lovers simply sitting on a bench holding hands. He took it all in with a calm sense of detachment. I let out a huge sigh of relief internally, hoping that Batman wouldn't suddenly decide to get out of the car in the middle of traffic, chasing gangsters in a deserted alley. I turned on the radio to play some songs and calm the atmosphere even more. Within minutes, Batman and I were slowly bobbing our heads to the rhythm of a rising jazz number. I had no idea who the artist was, but somehow I could feel the tension lingering from last night slowly fading away. Suddenly, I was distracted by a beep from the navigation system and realized that we had finally arrived at our destination. I slowed down the car gently and stopped, but my heart started racing again when I realized I'd stopped the vehicle near a police station. Before I could utter another word, Batman was out of the car. "Keep the car running," he said, looking back as he crossed the road to get to the police station. I saw 2 police officers standing outside the police station, drinking coffee and talking. Their attention quickly turned to the caped crusader, who gently tilted his head as he walked past them, offering a quick 2-fingered salute that made both officers smile. One of the officers then looked my way, winking and smiling at me as if signaling me to mention the arrival of this week's weirdo among us. I cursed under my breath, kicking my feet around the car as I pretended to smile back at the officer. A police officer saw me, and the last thing I needed now was to spend a night in a cell. All I can say for sure was that this version of Batman didn't want to pay a courtesy visit to his old friend Gordon. I kept the engine running, my hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, wondering if I should just drive away quietly. But my body had already frozen, and a part of me actually wanted to wait and see what would happen. This scared me even more. I scanned the surrounding buildings for cameras, and to my dismay, found them everywhere. I felt like they were installed specifically to keep an eye on me. When I looked across the road to have a look at the police station, I again found the same police officer looking at me, while his friend was busy answering a phone call. He had a curious look on his face, as if he was trying to connect the dots to a possible problem. I suddenly felt a pit in my stomach as I heard loud noises coming from the police building behind him. The screams of people echoed through the air as unknown objects fell and shattered on the ground. The officer looked back briefly before fixing his gaze on my panicked face, finally connecting the dots. He pointed his hand at me, looked me in the eyes, and sternly shouted at me to stay still. Soon after, also echoed from inside the police station. Both police officers quickly took out their weapons and ran towards the police building. pointed forward. Everything began to unfold in slow motion from that exact moment before my own eyes. As they searched for the door, a colossal fireball erupted from the building, destroying everything in its path. The explosion sent shockwaves, ripping the two men's bodies to pieces. An officer's head rose 30 feet into the air and landed on the hood of my car, before bouncing and slamming into the pole adjacent to me, finally settling into space. Between my car and the vehicle in front, which belonged to the police officer who had smiled at me just a minute before. Now, his haunting, lifeless gaze sent me into a panicked frenzy. I quickly put the car in reverse, only to hit the car behind me. Up your siren. My senses suddenly returned to real time. It was as if the clock had sped up, and I finally began to experience the chaotic atmosphere around me. The tree branches around the police station caught fire. The sirens of several cars screamed in unison while the people nearby were scared senseless, helplessly trying to dodge to protect themselves. I quickly tried to compose myself beforehand, trying to swerve to the right as much as possible to avoid running over the severed head in front of me. However, I injured the head, breaking it sideways and causing it to roll inwards, taking the maximum impact from my rear wheel. I shuddered in disgust as I struggled to steady my shaking hands gripping the steering wheel. Once I cleared some blockages and the nerves started to calm down, I could already see visions of the police breaking into my house and handcuffing my son's hands in front of me. What was going to happen to my son? He wouldn't make it anywhere else in the world, I thought to myself, my mind filled with worry. I drove around the city aimlessly for the next 20 minutes, contemplating the increasing likelihood of my own incarceration. Going to the police on your own made no sense. They wouldn't believe my story anyway. I would probably be named as an accomplice to the crime, and honestly, that wouldn't surprise me. Plus, there was Mr. Dellon himself and that miserable business of his that I also had to worry about. I'm definitely not going to get away with it now, and he won't be happy about it. I thought it would be best to keep quiet for a while until this was all over. So I ditched the car and stopped at a convenience store along the way to buy a new burner phone. I finally got to my apartment and quickly stuffed some clothes into a bag. I woke Luke, who was fast asleep in his bed, and made him get dressed. So I got in the car and headed to Philadelphia, where I thought I might stay at a friend's house for a few days before thinking about my next move. I decided to visit an old friend of mine from high school, Eric Gunther, who had moved to Philadelphia for work. Getting to him seemed like a good idea. When I arrived at Eric's house, it was already 4 a.m. He was surprised to see me at the door, with Luke fast asleep and resting on my shoulder. I immediately knew there was some kind of problem. He ushered me in and emptied a spare room for the two of us. Eric and I agreed to get some rest first and talk things over in the morning. After gently laying Luke down on the bed without waking him, I settled into a nearby rocking chair. Exhaustion took over me and I immediately fell asleep. When I woke up, it took me a moment to realize I was still at Eric's house. I checked my watch. It was already 8 in the morning. I looked at the bed next to me and realized that Luke was already awake, probably hungry, or Eric had already made something for him. I thought I could hear the TV playing in the living room. I slowly got up from my chair and walked out into the hallway, still groggy from last night. My legs suddenly gave way and I hit the ground hard. Eric had his head severed, stuck on a pitchfork erected in the middle of the room. I tried to get up, but my legs buckled again. I crawled into his room like a dog and opened the door. I grabbed the wall and stood up, finally straightening up to find the headless body of an old friend lying on the floor. I vomited my guts out right there, and suddenly I remembered Luke. He was nowhere to be seen. I got up and looked in every corner of the apartment. The bathrooms, the kitchen, the closets, under the bed, the attic, everywhere. He was nowhere to be found, and he wasn't the kind of boy to run away alone. So I went and started checking the other apartments in the building, including the terrace, and I couldn't find a trace of him. Finally, I remembered the basement where I parked the car and immediately ran to look for it there. When I reached the basement entrance, I saw drops of blood in the parking area that led to the trunk of my car, my heart beating my chest as I walked slowly, fearing the worst. When I got to the car with trepidation, I opened the trunk and slowly peeked out. There, in the center, was my portable phone, the one I bought earlier. As soon as I picked it up, it vibrated in my hand, revealing a new set of coordinates, pointing to my own address. I closed the trunk and immediately began my journey back to New York. I drove as fast as I could and ran to my apartment. The moment I arrived in town and opened the door to Luke's office, I breathed a huge sigh of relief to see him with Jennifer, who was helping him with his lessons. I sank onto a couch in the hallway, teetering on the edge of collapse. I think Jennifer somehow sensed my mood and apologized before leaving for her apartment. She also asked Luke to sit next to his father. Luke came and sat next to me, wrapping his arms around me and resting his head on my chest. An overwhelming avalanche of guilt washed over me as I stood there, thinking about my friend Arik, while also experiencing a sense of intense relief that my son was safe. Luke remembered me waking him up in the middle of the night, but he dismissed it as a dream as he finally woke up in his own bed. He gestured toward a sealed envelope placed on the coffee table a few feet away from us. When I picked up the envelope, I noticed that the wax seal had a trident symbol engraved on it. I tore it up and took out the letter that said, "We had an agreement. Go back to your normal life. Don't worry about the police." A simmering anger gradually took over me. I wanted to get up and break every item in Luke's apartment. His hug was the only comforting antidote that kept me from releasing all the pent-up frustration. So I simply closed the letter and started getting along with my daily tasks. I showered, bought groceries, cooked and cleaned, and then took Luke to soccer practice. We returned home at 6 p.m., and I got ready for my next appointment. Once dressed, I sat in the living room looking at the phone placed on the table, waiting for it to go off. At 7 p.m., I got the coordinates for my next pickup. I got off the couch, went to the liquor cabinet, and pulled out a full bottle of bourbon. After taking a big sip, I sat in the car and threw the bottle on the adjacent seat while the engine purred. With life taking its course, I took to the streets and prepared to pick up my new passenger for the night. The person I was supposed to hang out with was Gandhi. When I arrived at the designated place, I saw him dressed in a traditional loincloth and a shawl wrapped around his torso. Gandhi placed his cane behind his back after settling into his seat and remained indifferent as he watched me. Taking another sip of bourbon, I pressed the gas pedal as soon as he closed the door and began driving toward the drop point. When I finally slowed down and the car stopped at a traffic light, I saw a patrol car parked on the sidewalk. Their presence immediately reminded me of the sealed envelope. I rolled down the window and shouted to the officer sitting inside the car, and they waved in thanks. I took 2 big swigs of bourbon in front of them, but was a little surprised when they ignored me, even though my car was only 10 feet away from them. I swung my arm out the window and started spilling the alcohol onto the street. Still, I was ignored. I slammed the bottle against the car door, continuing to empty its contents onto the road as I looked at the officers with a smile on my face. I was livid when they simply smiled back at me and then continued their private conversation. In a fit of rage, I got out of the car and threw the bottle at his vehicle, where it hit the hood and shattered on the ground. Finally, I got their full attention. However, I stood there in stunned silence when I saw the police officers looking for the culprit in every direction except mine, while I was just 3 feet away from them. A police officer pushed me away and continued to look for the culprit ahead. They looked behind, to the sides, and even under the car. They checked the upper floors of nearby buildings to look for possible offenders. The officers then came to ask why I was looking at them and told me to go back to my car. Throughout this episode, Gandhi sat silently in the back seat, his face betraying no emotion or recognition. Then the light turned green, giving me the signal to continue driving straight. According to the GPS system, I should have gone straight ahead, but instead I took a sharp right turn and began to veer off course to my desired destination. I pressed the pedal as the car quickly picked up speed, 50 miles per hour, 70, 80. I swerved dangerously from time to time to avoid colliding with other cars, even though I knew I had a passenger in the back seat who actually looked more Indian than Gandhi. Was he really Gandhi? I looked in my rearview mirror and we locked eyes. At that moment, I felt the anger in me dissipate, and I couldn't understand why things could get even worse than they did now. I slowed the car to a stop and turned to look at him. He had his vision fixed on the window, looking outside and lost in thought. Although he seemed very aware of his surroundings, I asked him, feeling helpless and unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice, "What kind of madness are we?" He continued to observe the passing landscape without offering an answer. He just pointed straight ahead, as if he wanted me to keep driving. That was all he would offer as he continued to look outside. I sighed deeply, turned around in my seat, feeling disappointed. I started the car and slowly returned to the current route. When we arrived at the location, I saw a good number of people gathered in a square, which was strange considering how late it was. There was also a small team of people holding cameras and reporting from the scene. I removed the ticket from the GPS screen and threw it away, then dug into my shirt pocket and pulled out all the other tickets I had collected so far, throwing them in as well. They quickly submerged from view as people passed over them, blending into the activity of the square, while reporters clicked their cameras. I wondered what would happen if I suddenly jumped out of the car right now, naked and holding a machine gun. The crowd would only notice me and not the that I would be holding in my hand. Would I have the same kind of invisibility that I had a few minutes ago? While these bizarre thoughts remained in my head, the Japanese Gandhi had already gotten out of the car and was walking slowly towards the square, holding his cane at hip level, treating it like a samurai sword. As I began to turn my car around the block to head home, I watched him change his grip on the bat, lifting it horizontally to chest height, and then pulling it back to reveal what appeared to be a long sword. I no longer felt interested in attending the event, except for sadness about what would come next. Just before turning the corner, I looked in my rearview mirror one last time and saw Gandhi with his sword raised above his head like a warrior, charging into a group of people peacefully protesting gun violence. I simply walked home in silence. A few hours later, I realized that Luke had already gone to sleep. I felt deep gratitude to Jennifer for taking care of him during my work hours. When I finally entered my room and turned on the light, I found all the discarded golden tickets that were on my nightstand. They had somehow mysteriously found their way back home. Frankly, I wasn't surprised. I no longer had the fuel to feel another round of emotions for the day. I lay down on the bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Over the next few days, I drove to all types of clients. There was a woman who was dressed like a bird, with large wings attached to her back. I drove her around New York for 2 hours. She would stop at several places to feed on pigeons and sing to them before finally stopping at the Manhattan Bridge, only to suddenly jump into the water. There was another case where I had to wait inside the hospital while a surgeon came out of the building still dressed in scrubs. When he approached me, he threw away the gloves, mask, and even the shoes he was wearing. We got into the car barefoot and we drove for many hours, well beyond the outskirts of the city, to finally stop at a train station in a small town located in the middle of nowhere. He boarded one of the carriages of a goods train and simply lay down on his back as the train began to depart. I could see some scalps protruding from the pocket. God only knows what kind of destruction he was about to wreak in some remote corner of America. In another case, I dropped different people onto the same farm, one at a time, over a 5-day period. They dressed up as cowboys, a red Native American, a Confederate soldier, and an African-American slave, respectively. The last of them dressed as a former U.S. president. They waited patiently for all the members to arrive at the farm, and the moment George Washington stepped onto the ground, the were ready for what would be a duel to the end. By now, I was used to any kind of unpredictability from my passengers, but I continued piling up the tickets as the days went by. The initial anger I felt because of that point, and I just became numb and hollow inside. All I could think about was getting through this ordeal and getting back to my normal life. I still hoped this was a possibility for me. Finally, the last day arrived where I would be chauffeuring my 30th and hopefully the last customer of this month-long nightmare. I was already sitting in my car with my eyes closed, holding a phone. He played, as always, at 7 p.m. Once I discovered my new destination, I started the car and prepared for a final drive, wondering what was in store. When I arrived at the Guggenheim Museum, I could see a small crowd of people returning from a party. Attendees were a mix of men and women spanning various ages, all impeccably dressed in fashionable clothing. I wondered how I would be able to find my passenger amid the sea of faces. A young woman in a vibrant red dress caught my eye. She wore an elegant pearl necklace around her neck, capturing the subtle glow of the streetlights. His expressive eyes suggested a depth of mystery. Her artfully styled hair added to her overall charm, and a ring on her finger, probably a ruby, added a touch of opulence to her already captivating presence. I started the car and drove slowly to the point where she was. Our eyes met and she instantly broke into a warm smile. "Hi, Matthew," she said, gesturing for me to remain seated while she got into the car, sitting next to me. She retrieved a golden ticket and placed it on the screen, leaning back during the release, and offered a smile again as she looked at me. I looked ahead and started driving without recognizing her. The last thing I needed right now was to be fooled by a sexy siren, I thought. "Okay," she said, remaining unfazed by my stoic response. As I started to fix my makeup, "We have a long night ahead of us. Anyway, you can take your time to come and meet me if you want. My name is Pamela. You can call me Pam when you become more and more fond of me." I ignored the comment and drove in silence for the next 20 minutes, but my heart began to flutter again as I became increasingly familiar with the route. I realized we were driving straight to Mr. Devon's hotel. When the navigation system beeped, I brought the car to a stop and the new Regency Trident appeared located just a few feet away. When she saw the look of confusion on my face, Pamela quickly responded, "You're my date tonight, Matthew, did not you know?" he asked with an air of innocence. "Miss Pamela, this can't be right. I'm just a driver," was all I managed to say, a little lost for words as I tried to process the unexpected turn of events. Pamela gave a mischievous smile and casually continued, "Well, Matt, then let's make your last day memorable. Now let's go, we can't be late." She said this while looking into a compact mirror and adjusting her hair. Even as I sat quietly in my seat, she continued, "Come on, Matt, go and check your trunk," she said with a sense of urgency. I approached my trunk, unsure of what awaited me. Opening it, I discovered a new tuxedo neatly folded in packing paper. Reluctantly, I tried it on, and to my surprise, found it to be a perfect fit, even earning a nod of approval from Pamela herself. She quickly leaned in closer to fix my hair at the sides and then wrapped her arm around me, making me step back a little. "What is this, Maddie? Have you never felt a woman's touch before?" she asked, looking me in the eyes with apparent malice in her voice. Well, she's not entirely wrong. I haven't been with another woman since Luke's mother died during childbirth, I said, reflecting on how life had gotten in the way. But I hardly doubt that insatiable lust is a factor here, considering all the developments over the past month. Pamela gently poked me in the ribs. "Hey, don't spread me out, Matt. We'll have fun tonight, I promise." "Oh, I don't doubt it," I said, nodding my head in acknowledgement. "Great," he replied excitedly. We both walked up the stairs to enter the Trident doors. This was my first time walking inside the place, and my initial impression was a dominance of the color red. My eyes immediately fell to a sharp-looking Trident logo on the reception wall, while the expansive lobby boasted shiny red Italian marbles, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and old-world charm. Pamela directed me to the elevator, where a peculiar-looking figure was already waiting. He wore a hat and a large coat, and his face was hidden by a mask and black glasses. He was standing with a file neatly folded on his arm. As soon as the elevator door opened, everyone entered. The display board revealed that the building had about 50 floors. Floors 40 and above were restricted to the general public. Pamela used her ruby ring as a key, inserting it into a slot near the display and pressing the number 44. The masked man pressed the number 41, repeating the process with his own ring. More and more people entered the elevator as it rose, bringing us all closer together. However, the higher it went, quicker, people vacated the place, leaving just the three of us when we entered the restricted zone. The man with the mask was just inches away from me when his floor arrived. He left, turned to me and Pamela, and bowed once more before leaving again. My attention, however, was more focused on the narrow corridor that I saw ahead. It was filled with hundreds of people dressed like him, with their faces covered, all holding a file. They were sitting in a row of chairs that stretched further than I could see before I noticed the elevator door close again. Who are these people? What the hell is this place? I began to wonder when the doors opened again. I was looking at a large hall with hundreds of people sitting at busy tables playing cards. Pamela grabbed my arm and led us into the lounge, where the manager promptly escorted us to 2 open seats at a table. "What is happening?" I asked Pamela, bewildered by the situation. "We're here to play a game of poker, Matt, but we don't have money." "We don't use money here, Matt." And that was when I understood. For the first time, I noticed the golden tickets neatly stacked on every table. "But I don't have mine with me." "Don't be silly, Matt. What do you think it is?" Pamela asked, smiling and pointing to the table in front of me. To my utter shock, my stash of golden tickets magically appeared out of nowhere and was resting on the table in front of me. I could already feel my head spinning, with beads of sweat forming on my forehead as we sat in the air conditioning. When I took out my tuxedo pocket square, a small piece of paper fell into my lap. I picked it up, opened it, and read the message, "Don't spend the tickets." The note also caught Pamela's attention. She took it from my hand, and I saw her eyes wide in surprise too. Before she could utter another word, I abruptly stood up from my seat and ran towards the entrance of the hall. Once inside the elevator, I started pressing the buttons for the lower floors and realized that the ring was necessary for activation. Pamela arrived at the elevator entrance with some security guards near her. She had an angry expression on her face and was about to direct her guards at me. Only then did I notice a button lighting up on the display marked D, the highest floor of the building. Pamela noticed this on the external screen as well. When the door closed, I caught a curious smile on his face. Taking her to signal her guards to move away, a shiver ran down my spine, leaving this as my last image of her as the elevator reached the top floor. Cold, a gust of air greeted me from a dimly lit room. Hallway, small fire pans lined the walls, barely allowing me to see more than 10 feet ahead. Stepping cautiously, the pots began to light up automatically as I moved slowly, illuminating the path before me. Then, the temperature began to change rapidly. The cold I felt at the beginning was now replaced by warmth. The breeze made the back of my shirt stick to my skin. Finally, I stood before a grand entrance, massive doors adorned with sinister goat symbols. Suddenly, the doors opened on their own, and I took a deep breath before deciding to take a step inside. I felt a disturbing aura surround me as soon as I set foot inside the fire, which raged against the walls as it flowed in a rhythmic fashion, lending an unnatural crimson glow. In the center of the room, I saw Mr. Devon sitting on a large throne, his tail gracefully imitating the dance of the flames around him. Above the throne, a goat-headed pentagram symbol was embedded in the walls, hanging ominously. Mr. Devon looked very different since the last time I saw him. The heavy frame inside the salon and the pepper hair were gone. Instead, sitting in front of me was the devil himself, bald, with fiery red skin and menacing horns adorning his head. He exuded an otherworldly presence. The devil's piercing gaze met mine as a chilling silence filled the room. "Greetings, Matthew." What a delightful surprise. Mr. Devon's voice, the crackle of flames. "It's not every day that someone stumbles into the devil's den." He said this smiling. "Why don't you sit down?" He continued, pointing his gaze at the chair that magically appeared in front of me. I hesitated, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach, not knowing what awaited me in the presence of this diabolical figure, but I did as I was told. "What am I doing here, Mr. Devon?" I asked, looking around. "You really are the—" "Yes," he answered, before I could finish the question, and then he fell silent again, looking intensely at me as his tail swung in the air. A lot was going through my head. There were so many questions I wanted to ask, but I went with the one that would probably offer me the quickest way out. "We ended the 1-month agreement. Can I let you haven't spent the tickets yet, Matthew?" he said, continuing to stare at me. "I'm not much of a player, Mr. Devon. I'm just a simple guy. I don't really need the golden tickets. Maybe I'll donate them to someone in the room downstairs who's interested in playing." "Well, you have to use the golden tickets to get into their possession, Matthew. You can't just get rid of them by throwing them away or giving them away. You need to spend them." "But why?" "Because they represent your sins, Matthew. That's why you can't get rid of them. But when you spend them, you accept your part in it, showing a willingness to pay a price for your redemption." "As coming to work for me," the devil responded, smiling with his tail in the air as it swayed in a sinuous dance. The golden glow in his eyes intensified, revealing an otherworldly charm. "Join my army, Matthew, and I will help you unlock the hidden realms of your soul." "But I didn't do anything wrong," I protested immediately. "I stayed away from all violence. I was just the driver all the time. I did as I was told. Even after my friend Eric was for your people, I followed your orders. I had no choice in the matter." "But you had a choice, Matthew. You could have simply chosen not to show up. The next day, once I made the offer, and that would have been the end of it. You used a considerable amount of your free will right there when you decided to take the clown to the pharmacy, and you could still have walked away when you parked your car in front of me, seriously wondering which way you were going, but he chose to stay. Again, what little free will you had left, you spent it all that night. People don't realize their situation until it's over their heads. Your mistake became evident when the police arrived, and you knew a big line had been crossed. His choice was to take evasive action. By running away, you would already be knee-deep in this mess, and there was no turning back. Now you had to sow until the end." The devil's words resonated like a grim reminder of the irreversible path I had taken. I closed my eyes in frustration as a wave of guilt and remorse ripped through every fiber of my being, like a mirror reflecting my shortcomings and throwing them back in my face. "Don't you think this is enchantment?" the devil continued, his smile cold. "Matthew's innocence is an illusion. I simply offer people choices. It is your decisions that drive them. Why blame the apple on the tree when it's your eyes that refuse to look?" Although the devil expected me to respond, I felt the inner turmoil was reaching its peak. He then continued, "Speak, come work for me. Matthew became an agent for my project. You will deliver my message to people when they are ready. You will step into places where light can never hope to reach. Together, let us spread my influence far and wide, forever casting shadows that will remain in people's hearts. We will ring and answer your call, Matthew, just as your father did for me." I suddenly looked at him in shock. "Did my father work for you?" I asked, unable to suppress the tremor in my voice. "Yes, your father was actually one of the people who got into the elevator with you. Do you remember well? He even bowed to you in Hamala when he reached the floor. Who else do you think slipped that little note into your coat? It was sneaky of him, I must admit. I'm still looking for your son. If not for your intervention, you would have spent your tickets by now and come straight down. What did my father do for you?" For the first time, curiosity overcoming my disbelief. "Your father worked for me as an accountant. Did you see those people on floor 41? Weren't you the ones who wore a hat? Well, he A coat, sunglasses, and a mask covering your face, carrying a file hidden under your arms? They are responsible for delivering the file to people who are ready to embrace their true nature. The archive is representative of a book, which is the culmination of the individual's choices and actions and the moral debts they accumulate throughout their lives. When someone receives the file, it indicates that they have reached a point in their life where they can no longer maintain their status quo. They begin their inevitable descent into the darkest recesses of their own existence. But how will you know if someone is ready? "Look at me, Matthew," said the devil, spreading his hands and his lips curling into an evil smile. "I've been here since the beginning of time. Do you think I don't know when a person is ready? The real question is, are you ready to step into the role that's meant for you? I mean, you once worked with your father while he tended to this establishment. Who do you think played the ledger man? The one approaching the clown, or the woman dressed as a bird or Batman, or anyone else you've seen in the last few weeks? It was his own father, Matthew. Father and son were working together to push individuals to embrace their own destiny, bringing them to the brink of self-awareness, while his father held up the mirror to help break down the surrounding walls. The son led them towards their eventual destination. It's beautiful when you think about it, don't you think? Do you want me to become an accountant too? Yes, that is correct. While your father served me well, he is immortal at the end of the day, and I am not a tyrant to work him to the bone. He can retire and continue to serve in life after death, so it's essential that you fill his shoes. Now, are you ready? Matthew, I can see the devil spoke with a subtle nod of approval. Why I cannot? You hire someone else, since my father once served for you. Why not find a replacement from another family? Why does it have to be me? Because your family owes me, Matthew. His great-great-grandfather, Grandfather Armand Pritchard, was a wealthy accountant in Europe who lost all of his wealth when he moved to the United States. He made a deal with me promising 10 generations of Pritchards to serve at my feet if I helped him regain his wealth. So you're fifth in that line, Matthew. Your lineage is still only halfway through paying off your debt. I sat there in shock as the weight of old promises weighed on my shoulders. I was aware that my ancestors were rich, while my own father grew up poor from childhood, but my biggest concern was my own son. Does this mean Luke will have to take my place too? Eventually, yes, and your child later, your child's child, and so on until the debt is paid in full. The devil claimed to seal the fate of generations to come. No, 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 I began in anguish, my voice cracking under the weight of the apocalypse. This cannot be happening. It's not right to hold an entire bloodline hostage to a promise made by someone centuries ago. I can't let my son be part of this too. Well, your ancestors certainly didn't care about the money that came to them. They wasted it all again. For a second, time when you can't make a deal. And then, Ren. There must be a way out of this. I kept thinking to myself, the thought of passing this burden onto my son just filled me with dread. For the first time in my life, I began to appreciate the choices my father was faced with and the sacrifices he made to honor his obligations. But my mind was just trying to conjure up solutions to escape the same fate. Maybe I could run away with Luke whenever there was a chance and seek refuge in a religious place like a church that could protect us from the devil's influence. As I furiously shaped the future course of action in silence, the devil spoke again. Matthew, you realize you're free to leave, right? As long as you don't spend the ticket, I won't touch you. But remember this, in every little plan you are incubating in your mind right now. It's been tried before by others. So if you feel like you need more time to figure it out, go ahead. But keep in mind that there will always be a time when you eventually get your hands on that ticket. You can run and hide anywhere you want, but the ticket will still hang around your neck like an albatross. Perhaps you can find refuge elsewhere by escaping. Everyone there will eventually arrive. Know that you have something of value that will place a permanent target on your destiny. Back, or maybe in the future, there will be an accident for you or Luke, and you finally decide to pawn the ticket because you urgently need money for surgery. Or maybe Luke will develop a problem with and decide to use the ticket to finance your habit. I could go on, but you get the gist, for better or worse, because of the Father's intervention. You are sitting here right now in a position to negotiate your destiny. Why not try to make the best of it? I can't abandon my son. Not when I find out he's destined to eventually end up like me. I have a duty to protect your freedom, even if it means fighting a losing battle, I said despondently, but with my voice resolute and full of conviction. The devil looked at me with subtle amusement, silently assessing both my resolve and the inner turmoil I was battling at that moment. Silently, it became apparent that the devil fully understood the challenges he was prepared to face for my son's well-being. Okay, Matthew, maybe there is an alternative to this impasse, but I'm afraid you won't like it. I am prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure my son has a chance at a normal life, even if it means giving my own horn." The devil suddenly turned around, his horn blazing hot, as he let out a wave of laughter that echoed throughout the chamber. The flames licked the walls behind him, and the intensity suddenly increased. A ring of fire lit around my legs, quickly spreading to my feet and crawling up my body. I screamed in agonizing pain as the devil continued to laugh in the distance. Then I saw the fire consume me whole. My body went up in flames. Suddenly, I opened my eyes and realized that I was sprawled out on the couch in the living room of my own apartment. As I wiped the beads of sweat from my forehead, I noticed that I was still dressed in my tuxedo from last night. So the whole thing obviously wasn't a dream, but I still couldn't remember how I did it. At home, Luke was sitting in a nearby chair watching his favorite show while munching on cereal. I got up from the couch and experienced a lingering feeling of disorientation as I tried to piece together the events of the previous night. Deep down, my conscience was disturbed, and I still couldn't figure out why I went to my room and opened the closet to check the golden tickets. They were no longer there. At that exact moment, I heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway. I went to the window to take a look and saw a big red limousine parked at the entrance of my building. My heart started to pound immediately. It was the same kind of car that took Dad years ago, and they were probably here for me now. I made Luke get up from his seat and ordered him to stay in his room. Right after the doorbell rang, I approached the door and looked through the peephole, so I opened it. Henry Pritchard was standing in the doorway wearing a hat and an overcoat with a file under his arm. "Hello, Dad," I said, looking at him. He had removed his goggles and his mask was down to his chin. A tear ran down his eyes as he looked in pain. I could see that my father was here on an official visit. Seeing my father in person after all these years brought back memories of last night. I started to remember everything, including the deal that was made with the devil. "It's just that for me," I asked, pointing to the ledger in his hand. "You should have waited, son. We could have discovered something," he said, his voice expressing concern and regret. Although I knew my father was looking out for my best, I wondered what other alternative there was. So I simply leaned in to hug him for the first time in years, and he hugged me back, bringing a wave of relief to my already overwhelmed emotions. "Is this your last task?" I asked him, and he nodded in acknowledgement. "Good, because that was part of the deal," I said to myself silently. Our eyes then turned to Luke's room, where the little boy was peeking behind his door, wondering what was unfolding in the room. "Come here, boy. Say hello to your grandfather," I said, looking at him as Dad picked Luke up and gave his grandson a big hug. I took the ledger from his hand and sat down on a nearby sofa to take a look. When I opened it, all I found was a golden ticket. I took it in my hand and saw my reflection appear next to a set of numbers and a date before dissolving into nothingness. "So, I have about 48 hours?" I asked, pointing the card at the father. He nodded silently in the affirmative, while Luke was busy playing with his glasses. I took a long, deep breath and finally replied, "All right, then let's make the most of the time we have left." We spent the next 2 days outdoors, making sure we gave Luke the best memories possible to last a lifetime. We took Luke to see a Blue Man Group show, and our boat trip to Staten Island turned into a photo-filled getaway, capturing panoramic views of Manhattan and creating silly poses together. Luke and Grandpa had a lot of fun at Nintendo New York as the two spent a whole 2 hours just playing Pokemon. This was followed by a stop at Lombardi's, Luke's favorite pizza place. We also visited a few museums in between. When we got home, everyone was died tired and Luke had already fallen asleep. But I was happy to see my son warm up to his grandfather. The two had already managed to build a bond. The night before I left, I found a way to explain to Luke that I would be traveling to Europe for work, assuring him it would only be a month. "Grandpa will take care of you until I get back," I reassured him when the day arrived. We spent the morning joking and playing board games. While ordering, I also had a private conversation with Dad about managing Luke in my absence. I explained to him how I had coped during difficult times in my childhood, hoping it would give him some insight into how to deal with Luke if he started acting up. Dad was particularly upset about the path I chose, but there was nothing he could do to change it. We both had a few of whiskey to ease the tension, which provided some relief. It was my first adult moment with Dad, but it's a memory I'll cherish. The three of us left for Luke's soccer practice in the evening. While Dad and I were sitting in the stands watching him train, a BMW car arrived on the scene, immediately catching my attention. I hugged Dad one last time, and he had a hard time letting me go. I called Luke, letting him know I was heading to the airport, and he waved goodbye. He ran towards me, gave me a big hug, and ran back to his field to resume training. I picked up my shoulder bag and headed towards the car that was waiting for me. The driver was nearby, looked to be my age, and I could deduce that it wasn't his first trip, so he definitely had an idea of what to expect. I could feel the same emotion in him that I felt when I took the job. I simply gave him my gold card. He put it on the screen and started driving. I looked at Luke and Dad one last time before the driver turned the corner and onto the main road. Sitting in the back seat, my mind began to recall the conversation I had with the devil. The details of that disputed encounter replayed in my head like a haunting melody. The conversation at the end was perhaps the scariest of all, as the devil began to make clear the expectations he had of me if I wanted to relieve my family of the generational burden the role has repeatedly played. This has replayed in my head hundreds of times over the past few days. The car began to slow down as it reached its destination. Before leaving, I closed my eyes and wished the driver good luck. A look of surprise flashed in his eyes, his demeanor quickly softening as he realized someone understood the weight he carried. I could see he had 100 questions he wanted to ask me, but I was already out the door, my bag slung over my shoulder, and I made my way into the building. As I walked up the stairs, I took off my jacket and cap, put on my bag, and could hear the devil speak his final words again. "Okay, Matthew, maybe there is an alternative to this, but I'm afraid you won't like it. I am prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure my son has a chance at a normal life, even if it means giving up mine. Are you ready to give your life to save his? But are you ready to the woman by him?" "Yes," I said reluctantly. "The more heinous the crime, the more best protected your family will be under my rule." I arrived at my boss Gary Mikas's office and opened the door. I found him busy on the phone. His face immediately lit up when he saw me dressed in the autographed baseball jersey and cap he gifted me for my birthday. As a young man, I waited for him to finish speaking. "You and Luke caught a game today. The more heinous the crime, the more protected your family will be." "What are you talking about, Matt?" I repeated the exact words the devil told me during our encounter. While he still didn't understand, I saw my father God's face turn pale when he realized that I was removing a make of my jacket and locking the door behind me. A few years later, Luke Pritchard walked into the hospital with his 10-year-old son, Sam. He was holding a bouquet of flowers that he wanted to give to a patient. When he arrived at the patient's room, he knocked on the door before entering. "Please come in," said a voice from inside the room. An old man was lying on the bed with both legs heavily bandaged. He was involved in an accident while trying to save Sam, who was trying to cross the street without paying attention. The patient managed to save Sam in the nick of time, but was hit by a motorcyclist, resulting in fractures to both legs. "Hello, Mr. Dellin. How are you today?" Luke asked as he entered the room with Sam by his side. "Best, Luke, thank you," he said upon receiving the flowers. Mr. Dellin then looked at the boy and smiled. "How are you, young man?" "I'm fine, sir. I'm sorry about what happened to you," Sam said with a contrite tone. "Forget it. It's my son. I'm relieved you're okay," Mr. Dellin replied. Luke had been visiting Mr. Dellin every day for the last week since the accident happened. The two men had grown closer during visits, talking about the challenges in their own personal lives. This was the first time Luke had brought Sam along with him so he could apologize in person. Mr. Dellin looked at Sam. "So, what are you wearing, my son? You're a baseball old block fan, huh?" he asked, pointing to Sam's shirt. "Actually, he takes after his grandfather. He was a huge baseball fan," Luke replied. "Interesting. Is he the one you said is currently serving time in prison?" "Yes, Mr. Dellin," Luke replied with a trace of sadness in his voice. Eventually, they changed the subject and talked about other things for half an hour. When Luke finally got up to leave, he asked, "Mr. Dellin, would it be possible to take a picture together? I would like to send a copy to my father. I think he would love to see a picture of the man who saved his grandson." "Of course, Lucas, I'd love that," Thomas Dellin replied, smiling.